Okay, so let's jump into the message. We've been talking about this idea about how to live life with a little less panic, and we're going to try and continue in that theme today. A number of months ago, my wife and I ended up getting stuck in Atlanta airport. We're in the queue and we are waiting to check on our luggage to fly home. And the guy in front of me, who I could tell that he was clearly on the same flight that we were going to be on, was being told by the guy behind the desk, sir, we're really sorry, there's nothing we can do, but we've had to cancel your flight tonight. And he was like, oh, what, really? And the guy continued to say, well, the thing is, not only have we had to cancel tonight's flight, but we've also canceled tomorrow night's flight as well. And I'm overhearing this and I'm listening to it. So I'm thinking, today is Monday, so that means we're not getting home till Tuesday. And then he said, the thing is, on Wednesday, the flight that you're supposed to be going on is full, so we can put you on standby for Thursday's flight. And this guy, who was right in front of us, just said, okay, fine. And I thought to myself, there's no way I'm getting the okay, it's fine treatment given to this guy. I'm getting ready to open up an absolute can on this guy because I know how this works. So it's our turn at the desk and he says, Mr. Bryant, we have to tell you, tonight's flight is canceled and tomorrow night's flight is canceled, but you can go on standby for Wednesday night's flight, which means that you might get on, you might not, but if you don't, we can guarantee you a flight on Thursday, which means that you're gonna get home on Friday. And I'm thinking, 5 days out of my life? I said, hey, listen, bro, there's 220 flights that leave the USA and head to Britain every single day. That's 50,000 seats. I think you can get me and my wife on 2 of those seats. And he's like, well, sir, there's nothing that we can do from this airport. We're not running any flights. I said, no, maybe not. But you can fly us to another airport that's going to be flying back to Britain. And he was like, well, we can do that, but only if there's an available flight. Can we check? So he went on the computer and then he came back up and says, computer says no. So I said, okay then, but I know the rules here. I know if you can't get me home on your flight, I can find a flight and you have to pay for me to get back home. And he goes, computer says okay. And I was like, yeah, you're right, that's okay, because there's no way that that's fine to stay here for 5 other days. But I was thinking, isn't that such a quintessentially British thing to say? I'm fine. I mean, it's part of our language, it's part of our vocabulary. It doesn't matter what bad news we're being given, your response is gonna be, that's fine. I mean, we say it all of the time. People say, hey, how are you? We say, oh yeah, I'm fine. Really? Because I heard that you were just made redundant. Yeah, I'm fine. Okay, great. How are you doing? Are you okay? Oh, I'm fine. Didn't your wife just leave you 2 weeks ago? Oh, yeah, but I'm fine. Someone else, you say, how are you doing? How's the new baby? Oh, it's fine. Even though you've had 3 hours sleep in 4 days. And granted, that baby is beautiful, but he don't want to sleep. But you're still gonna say, I'm fine. The reality is that you can be asked, how you doing? And you're gonna respond and say, I'm fine, even though your dog's just died. You respond and say, oh, I'm fine, even when you've been given a diagnosis by a doctor. We say, I'm fine, when somebody asks you, is everything all right at home? When in reality, you haven't spoken to your spouse for 2 whole weeks, other than asking where the TV remote control is, but everything's fine. As a parent, you can say, hey, how are the kids? And you'll respond and say, well, they're fine. Even though one's just failed their driving test, the other's just been suspended from school, and now you have a golf club hanging in the middle of your garage door. Everything is fine. And then, of course, you go to the doctors, and the doctor says, so how are you? You say, well, I'm fine. Well, why are you here then? It's the doctors. You say, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad's the pain? Oh, I'm fine. It's about a 3, which is ironic because only British people would say it's about a 3. If it was an Italian person, they would have an ambulance ready, 3 relatives crying, and they would have the priest on standby. But British people will say, no, I'm fine. But this actually does create a problem for those of us that call ourselves followers of Jesus. It creates a problem and a tension for those of us that are committed to being followers of Christ and followers of the red text. The red text in the New Testament, in a lot of people's Bibles, are where Jesus speaks to us and he instructs us and he teaches us the ways in which we can be most like Christ. But when people respond all of the time in life and say, yeah, I'm fine, this makes our fellowship of Jesus even harder. And I'm going to show you why. It creates a problem because of what Jesus teaches. You see, in Matthew 13, verse 34 to 35, Jesus says this, "A new command I give you, love one another. Just as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Matthew 22 says, "Love God and love your neighbor as yourself." Matthew 25, Jesus teaches, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry, or feed you, or thirst, and give you something to drink?" And the king will reply, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." But it's not just the writings of Jesus that create us a problem. It's also what Paul writes. And there are so many scriptures, too many for us to go through with the time that we have. But let's take Galatians 6, for example. Paul teaches that if we follow Christ, it's now our job, we're tasked with carrying each other's burdens. 1 Thessalonians 5, it teaches us to encourage one another and build each other up. But then Peter's writings in 1 Peter 3 verse 8, he teaches us to be sympathetic, to love one another, to be compassionate and humble. Then John teaches in John chapter 4, whoever loves God must also love their brother and sister. And check this, James, who's the very brother of Jesus, in James chapter 2, he goes on to teach that faith without practical care is dead. In other words, it's very clear from scripture that if you follow Christ, it's no longer okay for you to just be a church attender and just come and sing the songs and listen to something that might inspire you. He's saying, no, this is a complete gear shift with regards to the way in which you shape and live your life. Now you follow me. Your life is going to be marked by something completely different. Now you're going to take care of others. Now others are going to be put first in your life. Now you're going to be generous and kind and considerate and compassionate to others. And this was Christ's entire message. But as a follower of Christ, this is hard because things aren't always clear when things are going wrong in people's world because of the response that we often give of, "I'm fine." Like, how do you know to help, be caring and considerate and compassionate towards somebody who's clearly not fine, but telling you that they are fine? What are you supposed to do, and how do you handle somebody that's maybe in their life experiencing a crisis or a trauma or some kind of anxiety attack or worry or just overwhelmed because they've got stuff happening in their life? Like, this is all made so much more complicated by the fact that when people that you love are hurting, they very rarely tell you that they're hurting, and they almost never tell you what they need. The fact is, most people, when they're hurting and they are not fine, even though they'll tell you that they are fine, they don't say, "Hey, will you just come round?" They don't say, "Hey, you won't believe what's going on in the family right now. Will you just come and sit with me for a moment?" They won't say, "You've no idea what I'm dealing with in work right now. The pressure is just overwhelming. I can't keep up. Could we just gather just to pray for a few moments?" Most people don't say, hey, listen, I'm really struggling on a health point right now. Can you mow the lawn, or can you hammer the picture into the wall? Can you practically help with a task around the house? Most people don't ask you because hurting people almost never tell us what they really need. And whilst it's important that you know as a follower of Christ how to handle life in situations that would naturally cause you to panic, I think it's incredibly important, especially because of the emphasis that Christ puts on his teachings to us, that it's also important that you know how to help someone that you love when they are hurting, so you don't go into a spiral of panic when you get so overwhelmed and confused about not knowing what to do when they say they're fine, but really they are not. So today I want us to explore this question: how do you respond when someone you love is hurting? As a follower of Jesus, how do you respond when there's someone that you love in your family, when there's someone that you love in your life group, when there's a friend, when there's someone that you're close to is so clearly hurting? How do you respond and not panic? Job is a book that's written in the Old Testament, although some people may pronounce it Job, which is a good thing for each and every one of us to have. But the actual book explores some of the Bible's deepest explorations of suffering and faith and God's sovereignty. It's the book that really does ask and attempt to answer the question of why is it that good people sometimes suffer? Job is introduced to us as this blameless, righteous man who clearly loves God and has clearly brought his family up to love and acknowledge God as being the Lord of his life. He's devoted to God with his whole heart. And in the book, Satan argues to God that the only reason that Job loves God is because of the way in which God has blessed Job so greatly, so significantly. He was blessed beyond measure. And as a result, God allows Satan to test Job. Most people remember the book of Job because of the suffering that's recorded within it. But I think that there is another angle that I want to explore today that might help you to not panic when someone that you love is hurting. Let's jump to the text though. In Job chapter 1, verse 13 through to 17, it starts to build the picture and the backdrop and the context for what's happening in Job's life. It tells us that one day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. Whilst he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who's escaped to tell you. Whilst he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. In this one day, Job is losing everything that he's been building his life towards. In this one day, Job starts to lose his wealth and all of his possessions very quickly. It tells us that he loses his oxen, he loses his donkeys, he loses his sheep, his camels, his servants. His life's work disappears in one afternoon. Like, this is a bad day right there. And not only does he lose everything, but he also loses his ability to create more of what he previously had. His slate has just been wiped completely clean. But then the text goes on and it tells us even more atrocities were to come his way. It says that in Job 1, verse 18 through 19, it says, while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the four corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are all dead, and I am the only one who's escaped to tell you. So now he loses all of his children. I don't know this for certain because I've never experienced this. But when we were children, my elder brother, he died of meningitis. And I always remember my mum telling me just a few years ago that the grief of a parent losing a child is just beyond words to describe. And here Job is experiencing that there really is no greater grief that any person can ever imagine or experience than the loss of a child. And now Job, on this same day, as having lost all of his wealth, he now loses all of his children. Some of you right now are thinking, wow, this is one depressing day to come to church. This is a really depressing message. But the verse goes on to tell us that things don't stop there, and in fact, they get far worse. In verse 7, chapter 2, it says, so Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. I mean, really what we're watching happen here is now Job himself is starting to lose his own health. Job now becomes physically broken. Some people will even argue that things have gotten so bad for Job that he's actually starting to self-harm. Like this is how bad and overwhelming things have got for him. And then the story continues because in verse 9, it now tells us that his wife says to him, are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. In other words, now Job loses the support of his wife. Even his closest relationships can't seem to carry the weight of all the suffering and the pain that's going on around him. And then the story doesn't get any better because in Job 3:11, it tells us, why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? It's almost like Job is experiencing this immense emotional crash. This is a terrible day in the life of Job. He's experiencing grief, trauma, depression, physical pain, financial ruin, family devastation, and all on the same day. And yet, if Job were British, he'd probably say, yeah, I'm sound, I'm fine, no problems, I'm fine. But on this day, during this season of Job's life, this is where the Bible gives us such clear indication about what the response of Job's friends were to the devastation that was being afflicted upon him. And it's this response that I think can be a template for you and I, just as followers of Christ, part of a local church here in Liverpool, that can really give us a template so that you and I together can help do the things that Jesus and Paul and Peter and John and James instructed us to do, which was, guys, you've got to make sure that you're caring for other people. There's a template in this text that comes that describes three friends of Job, and it tells us how they responded initially to all of the pain their loved one was experiencing. This is what the text reads. Job chapter 2, verse 11. It says, when Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad and the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamite, heard all about the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. So, how do you respond when someone you love is hurting? How do you respond when somebody that you care about as a follower of Christ that you want to help, but you don't know how to help, and you don't want to panic them, you don't want to live life panicked yourself, but you want to know, what is it that I can do? The answer is in this text here, because there are three things that the three friends of Job did to respond to their friend that was experiencing this immense crash in his life. And it's this template that I want to teach to you today. The first thing that they did was they took the initiative. Point one today is, if you want to help someone that you love that's hurting, you have to take the initiative. I want you to notice that in the text, it tells us that it was when they heard that Job was experiencing what they were. It was when they heard that Job was having a bad day. It was when they became aware of the troubles that were being afflicted upon him. They did not wait for any kind of confirmation. They did not wait for a sign from the Lord. They didn't even pray about it, but it tells us that they simply went and found Job. They took the initiative and they said, hang on a minute, our friend is in trouble. Someone that we love is hurting. We're not gonna wait until he calls or texts or DMs, but we're gonna go and be actively involved in the pain that he's feeling right now. And they did it at the point at which they heard of the news of Job's troubles. It tells us that they set out from their homes. In other words, they left everything that meant a lot to them behind as soon as they became aware of the troubles, and they left it to go and be with Job. And I just want you to allow me a little bit of preacher's license in here, okay? They left their homes, which probably would have meant they had to pack a bag, prepare for some travel. You know, they weren't able to Uber across to Job's gaff. That wasn't an option for them. In other words, they didn't send a praying hands emoji on Instagram. They didn't send him a text saying, hope you're gonna be okay. They didn't send a message through a friend to say, hey, when you see Job, let him know I'm praying for him. Let him know I'm thinking about him. They heard and they set out from their homes. They went to be with him directly. They didn't send word or send a message. They didn't even send servants, not a card, not a letter. They went to be with him in person. And that's what you and I should do as well. As followers of Christ, I don't want you to have to panic when someone you love is hurting, because now you know what to do. The first thing is you have to take the initiative, because what you've got to remember is hurting people will never tell you what they need, and oftentimes they don't know how to convey to you what it is that they want. So you, as the healthy person, has to take the initiative. But I do want you to just note something in the text that's really important, and I'll try and convey this through a personal story as well. I want you to know that it was Job's three friends that as soon as they heard, they left everything to be with him. It wasn't Job's colleagues. It wasn't his acquaintances. It wasn't his Instagram buddy that we say we're friends, but really you just follow them and have sent them one heart emoji one time. And now you're like, we're friends. You're like, no, you're not friends. You don't know them. They don't know you. You don't interact with them. But the scriptures tell us that it was their friends that picked up everything and they left to go and be with him immediately. Many of you will know some of our story as a family. A number of years ago, when my wife had received a diagnosis for blood cancer, just the most random thing happened on that very day. We'd been to the hospital and we'd spent all afternoon with a consultant in hematology. And basically, we'd just been given this news, and it felt like someone had turned our entire world completely upside down. But when we arrived home, the receptionist from the hospital, about 50 minutes later, turned up at our house with a bouquet of flowers to tell us how sorry they were to hear the devastating news, and that she recognized us from church. I don't even know how legally you can get our address, okay? But that was not helpful to me, to have my children answer the door, to be met by a stranger bringing flowers and a sorry card to convey their deepest sympathies, because that person was not a friend. That was not somebody that knew us. That was not someone whose life ever bumped into our life. It was just somebody that on a couple of occasions, a whole bunch of years ago, that happened to be the receptionist at the hospital, that had clearly gone online, found our address, trying to do a good thing, trying to do the right thing, trying to be helpful, because it definitely will have made them feel better, but yet it was not a help to us at all. It was actually the worst thing that could possibly have happened in that moment. And yet, if I were to just flip the story and go about 6 hours later to about 10 o'clock that night, when Wayne and Sarah Palmer come banging on our door, completely uninvited, but knowing that something was wrong. And we wept and we cried and we got on our knees and we prayed before God. It was the most powerfully strengthening thing. Why? Because that's the difference between a friend coming and someone that's just a colleague or an acquaintance or a receptionist. So I want to try and give you something that's very practical that helps you to decide, should I go or should I stay? Should I go and try and appeal to them? Should I go and try and insert myself into this crisis? And I kind of think this is the thing that we need to do. Ask yourself these 3 questions to decipher. Am I a friend that should go? Do you talk, text, and do you take trips together? Talk, text, and trips. Because if you do 2 of those things, I put it to you, I think you should go. If you regularly talk on the phone and you regularly converse, hey, how's your day? How's your world? How's the kids? If you talk on the phone, or if you regularly text recently and often and you're communicative, or you take trips together, you go on holiday together, you go to restaurants together, like you hang out, you do barbecues in each other's houses together. If you do 2 of those 3 things, then I put it to you that you would be a friend and you should really consider taking the initiative and going, because remember, hurting people will always struggle to tell you what they need and what they want. So you have to take the initiative. The second thing that these 3 friends all knew was this: they knew of their purpose. The text tells us very clearly in the passage that we've just read that they went to go and sympathize and comfort him. They went with 2 items on their agenda: sympathy and comfort. Now, in the Hebrew word, which is a word called nud, a great word to remember, nud, you need to go and nudge your friends. It was really less about them sharing in words, and it was more about them sharing in their presence. The idea that they were going to be sympathetic towards somebody, it carried this idea that they were going to refuse to allow their friend to suffer on their own. That's what sympathy meant in the text in Hebrew. And then that word comfort, it comes from a root word nahum. It means that it carries this idea of helping somebody to breathe again. In other words, they were able to bring emotional support and stability. You know what it's like when you lose your breath? Maybe because you've been working out, or maybe even because you've got so overwhelmingly anxious and you're struggling to breathe. And then the moment that you're just able to just breathe again, everything starts to come together. And that's what these friends did. And I want you to know that they didn't go to analyze or explain or to debate why this might have been happening. They didn't go to preach their latest sermon or download onto them the latest downloaded podcast that they've been living in. They just simply went, and their purpose was so crystal clear. It was to bring sympathy and it was to bring comfort. So they took initiative, and then they went to bring sympathy and comfort, and that was it. And then the third thing that they did is that they were present in the moment. And I think that's what you've got to do when somebody that you love is hurting, is just be prepared to be present in the moment. Job chapter 2, verse 12 to 13, it says, when they saw him, meaning Job, from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. And no one, check this, no one said a word to him because of how great his suffering was. You know, there are some times when people that you love are going to go through things, and the truth is, your words will not cut it. You haven't got anything that you could possibly say that could make this any better. Like, you sit with a parent that's just lost a child, you try and make it better, there is no way that that's even possible. And that's what these friends were doing here. They were saying, hey, listen, we're prepared to just be with you and be present and share in your grief and pain in this moment. If you're gonna cry, Job, I'm gonna cry with you. If you're gonna get angry, Job, then I'll hold you. If you're gonna get upset, Job, then I'm gonna stand right next to you. They were just prepared to be present in the moment, which actually, it really does go against everything that we like to give people in those moments when we love them and they're hurting. Because what we do, if you're anything like me, and I've made all of these mistakes, is that we go with an agenda that is less about trying to be present, and it's more about how you try and minimize it because it makes you feel better, not them. So when they tell you they've just been made redundant, lost the job, and their world has come down, what do you say? It's okay, there'll be another job. Doesn't help. We minimize it. It's okay. You know, something else will come along, you know, like the 10-year marriage and relationships come, oh, there's plenty more fish in the sea. It's like, what? This doesn't help at all. It might make you feel better, but it doesn't help the hurting. Then what we do is we often compare. And those of you that are connectors, like you just love people, you have a gift of speaking and being communicative with people, but you do it through comparison. And what that means is, someone tells you that they've just bought their wedding dress, immediately you interrupt them and start talking about your wedding dress because you're looking for a way to connect with them. Someone tells you they've just bought a new car and it's a VW, and you say, hey, I had a VW one time. Someone tells you, I've just got a new job and it's a new job in the NHS, and you said, hey, let me interrupt you. I'll tell you, I've got a friend that used to have a job in the NHS. And what we start to do is we compare in an attempt to connect. But when someone that you love is hurting, you don't need to compare the time that you lost a dog, that you lost the job, that you got sick with tonsillitis, and even though it's totally different to a cancer diagnosis, like just fight the urge to minimize or compare, and definitely fight the urge to try and explain it, because actually that's where everything started to go wrong for the 3 friends of Job. They made the gravest of mistakes, because what they tried to do was convince Job that all of the affliction that he was experiencing was because of the sin in his life. And this angered the Lord, because it's not how he works. He is a good God, a good, loving, caring Father. And everything started to go wrong in the story when they later decided to try and figure this out and explain everything for them. So my ask of you today, Liverpool One Church, is that you become followers of the red text of Christ, that you would love one another in the same way that God has loved you, that you would be intentionally kind and caring and considerate. And you might be saying right now, well, I don't even know why I'm listening to this message, because my life's great, my life's awesome, and everybody I know, their life is all amazing as well, and that's great. But I promise you, there will come a point in time when someone you love is going to go through crisis and trauma. And I don't want you to panic because you don't know what to do, because today you do. You take the initiative. You make sure that you know of your purpose. You're going to sympathize and you're going to comfort, and you're going to commit to just being present in the moment and fight the urge of trying to minimize, compare, or explain. And if we do that, Can you imagine for a moment what kind of a reputation as followers of Jesus we would have all throughout our city? Could you imagine what kind of a reputation that we would have as a church, as a community, as a gathering of believers if we did these three things when someone that you love is hurting? I think that is going to be the most attractive thing that anybody that doesn't know Christ can ever look upon and see, and then maybe even consider for themselves, maybe I might give Jesus a chance too. So take the initiative, know your purpose, and be present in the moment. Let's stand to our feet. We're going to pray and we're going to worship together. Let's just close our eyes and bow our heads. Heavenly Father, today I firstly just pray a very, very simple prayer for anybody that's in church today that is hurting, that is broken, that is lost, lonely, confused, depressed, downcast. I pray that they today would know that they are surrounded by a family of followers of Christ that want to genuinely show love, care, and support as brothers and sisters in the faith truly can do. God, I pray that you would help to lift them up and encourage them. But equally, and just as importantly, God, I pray that today, that when someone that we love is hurting, that we'd be able to implement these three very simple thoughts and points. Help us today to be the kind of church that cares in practical ways. Help us, oh God, to not just gather on a Sunday, to just turn up, walk in, walk out, and then not follow the Jesus text in between the 6 days that come between Sundays. Help us, oh God, to care for others in the way that you've cared for us. In Jesus' name we pray, amen and amen.